In a nutshell, what you're looking, we know that insulation, you want to provide insulation to stop heat flow. The thermal bypass checklist actually wants to stop the flow of air. Because air over insulation is going to degrade it. It's going to create these convective loops, is going to render it ineffective. So it's an air barrier that prevents the flow of air through the insulation. That's what the thermal bypass checklist is. And though there are so many points on here, not all of these apply to any given house. How many of you build with fireplaces right now? Masonry fireplaces. Okay, one out of a room full of many. That would have to be checked off if we're doing your house. But in many instances, we're not looking at the entire list on any given project, so we're not going to look at it today. Number one, the overall air barrier. As you can see, what you want, and I think it's in the next slide, it wants two interesting words. We discussed at length yesterday. It has to be continuous. You want to be able to draw a line and never leave the page for the insulation around the house. So that's a continuous insulation. It also has to be contiguous, which means in this instance, if you're dealing with a wall cavity, it has to be surrounded on all 6 sides by some sort of barrier, something that will prevent air from moving in. And think about an exterior wall assembly. You have the exterior sheathing, you have the bottom plate, the top plate, the sides of the studs, that's 5, and then you have sheetrock. That's the 6 areas that they're enclosed in. What about a tub surround? You know, how many people just throw up fiberglass insulation and screw the tub surround to the wall? There's no air barrier there. That's what we're talking about. Knee walls is probably one of the most difficult areas that we find builders addressing ineffectively. And you see this pink line right here. If you have a vented attic right here, you've got air coming in through here and hopefully going out through the ridge. Well, it's moving all around here. And if this insulation on the knee wall isn't encapsulated on all 6 sides, you're going to have cold air washing over that insulation and rendering it ineffective. So this particular pink line right here is nothing more than an air barrier. An air barrier could be a piece of cardboard. It could be a piece of rigid foam. It could be a piece of drywall. Anything that will stop, could be a piece of plastic. Anything that's going to stop the flow of air. Here, I'm pointing out, you know, the void. We've seen this picture before, but you're stuffing that insulation behind the pipe, and then you're going to have a piece of sheetrock spanning these 2 studs. Well, you've got this huge void between the pipe and the insulation. That's no longer contiguous. That can lead to these convective loops happening, and they occur more often than you might think. I mean, if you look at this ceiling assembly, you know, right here is probably the worst offender. You want to have as much of this contact as possible with all the surfaces of the cavity that you're putting that insulation in. The exceptions for surrounding the insulation would be the attic and the basement floor. You need to be in contact with 5 sides. So this being, assuming that this is a basement right here. Oh, did I get it wrong, Mary Lou? I did. Assuming this is the basement right here, you want to see these bats fully lofted. You don't want to see voids such as this. In an attic situation, you're not going to cover up the top of the insulation. What do you typically do when you have insulation in the attic? You're using soffit vents, which allow the air to rise up over the insulation and then move up towards the ridge. I'm looking for time here. Okay, walls adjoining exterior and unconditioned space. This is considered a wall. It's not considered part of your ceiling assembly. What you'd need to do is throw on some sort of air barrier. Rigid is probably the best to do with skylights. Again, we talked about tubs. What you really need to do is put in a piece of thermal ply, put in something, even drywall, before you put the tub in. so that you're encapsulating all of that insulation. So anytime that you have a wall joining an unconditioned space, you need to close that off. Floors between conditioned space and exterior spaces. If you're cantilevering out beyond, it's a standard wall assembly, we see this a lot. People just throw in insulation, throw in a soffit vent, and call it a day. But you're going to have movement of air coming up through that soffit vent and right in through that insulation. You need to block it off. And just some rigid board, you could do it with blocking. This is nice in that it's easier to work with and it provides a higher density of insulation. Building shafts, providing you with 3 pictures. If you start in the basement, you look up, you're putting insulation in, if you're putting insulation in here, you've got this huge void that air can move over. Same with ducts going through big chases between floors or between insulation layers. You need to close those off. You also need to seal off any type of pipe or electrical penetration. That's required by code anyway. So it's nice that you have a third party coming in, a HERS verifier, saying, hey, this is wrong, that's wrong. Before the building inspector or the electrical inspector gets there, you can stay one step ahead of him, keep him off your back. Attic and ceiling it, insulation, a huge loss right here. When you have pull-down stairs, this is a standard feature now. It's just an insulated dome that goes right over it. And again, you're looking at these soffitted ceilings, tray ceilings. How often do you see sheetrockers actually covering up something like that? That's unacceptable. If you can spray foam that, if you can put in, cellulose is a great cure-all. It's the poor man's insulation or high-quality insulation. If you board all of that up, then spray your cellulose on afterwards, you're taking care of all of these thermal bypass issues. You have a very effective insulation strategy. But you're looking at key areas where there's the disalignment, there's a disassociation between the pressure and the thermal boundaries of the house. And the HERS Radar and these checklists can help you make sure that they don't occur. The other area, how many of you do attached family housing? More than one unit, more than single family homes? All right, then you need a firewall between them. I've seen enough firewalls go in as poorly as they go in well, but you really need to seal up all the penetrations. You don't want air moving. So between all the floors, top and the bottom, you need to seal that up. It being a firewall, you can't use a regular foam gun. It stops the flow of air. You need some sort of intumescent caulking, fire-rated caulking, and that'll pass the thermal bypass inspection as well.